Today I wanted to talk a little bit about personal distress. Um, there's a lot going on in the world. Of course, there always is, but I think maybe I'm a little fatigued with COVID, and then on top of that, the whole thing with Afghanistan and the troops leaving and all the suffering that that's entailing. And then actually living with climate change now, very personally, we all are. And so it's easy for my mind to um, get distressed by that. And kind of like what Venerable was talking about just our last teaching, um, letting the mind dip into kind of unhappiness and then how that affects and how that affects my practice, how that affects my wish to develop and generate and live through compassion. Um, and personal distress is not conducive to that goal of being compassionate to others and to myself, actually, too. Personal distress is a very narrow focus, very self-involved, feeling, distressed by what we don't want. And of course, that's so different from compassion, which is the wish for all living beings, including ourselves, to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And so with compassion, if I generate that, I'm generating an attitude, an emotion that I want. And it's not imprisoned by self-concern. So it's vast, it's a big mind. Personal distress is very narrow, all focused on me and what I don't want and what I'm experiencing. I think it's helpful for me when I can remember that the causes of the suffering that I'm experiencing today were created in the past. Again, this helps me open up to a vaster view. And then my next thought often is then how I react to the unsatisfactoriness or dukkha that I'm experiencing today will determine then what I experience in the future. Again, so that opens things up for me. So compassion really opens a path to go forward to help others without falling into despair, without being limited by our own personal distress. Personal distress, it's exaggerated grief. Those are the close enemies of compassion, and they're distorted, of course. In the text, it sometimes portrays compassion as finding others' suffering unbearable. And that word doesn't work for me. When I think of something unbearable, it would be similar to being overwhelmed with despair or grief. So I always have to change that word out because that can lead me to personal distress, actually. And that happens a lot, when I'm studying something or learning about and the way that things are translated. I have to often translate them into something that's going to work for my mind. Everybody's so different, I'm sure. So using the word unbearable, that's not going to work for me. So instead, I try to recognize when I'm noticing somebody's distress and how my body and mind want to go toward that. And sometimes the image that I have in my mind is like a toddler running across a room and they trip and fall. My immediate reaction is, let me go help. Let me pick them up. Let me comfort them. So like that. And that to me isn't unbearable. It's bearable. It's doable. It, it brings me close to another that's suffering. So that's kind of how I try to work with developing compassion and figuring out in my very small, ordinary way how I might be able to help. Because I'm a very ordinary person. And when I think about these big things that are happening in the world, COVID and wars and climate and all of that, I can feel very small and very kind of overwhelmed. And then again, personal distress. But it's not helpful for me to look at it that way. So I see these big things, but then I bring it back to, well, what can I do today? What can I do with the people in front of me? That's where my practice is. I can't do something with stopping a war or stopping the Taliban, or I can't do that. But here in this place, in this community, I can try to keep my heart open when it wants to close. I can try to learn about and get very clear about how I react when I get triggered, whatever that means, and how I feel myself wanting to pull back and to resist that and go forward instead, or at least, if I can't stay there, at least keep my mouth shut and try to work internally instead of bleh, something coming out and hurting another person. And so then, my practice kind of is I start out the day with whatever mind I have, and I try to figure out how I'm going to work with myself with the mind and body I have today. And then I go through my day and I keep trying to make motivations about that. And then at the end of the day, I review, what have I done? What did I do? And that's the time often where I'll connect what I did that was reasonable or kind or compassionate or loving, non-harming, not cruel. And then I kind of reflect on that and remember that and rejoice in that and see how that is actually impacting these bigger things that are happening in this universe. Because how I respond and react influences, if we really believe in the Buddha's teachings, it influences because it's all a dependent arising, and there is connection between what we do here and how that influences others. And we know that. People write to us all the time from all kinds of places about how what we are doing here has impacted them in a positive way. And so the more that I can keep connected to that, the more I think I'm more in alignment with reality, the more I have more resource, the more I'm able to practice compassion and not practice personal distress, which is not helpful. And I already know how to practice that a lot. I don't need to practice that anymore. But compassion, I need to develop that more. So this is one of the ways that I can kind of do that. So maybe today, if we're feeling burdened by what's going on and feeling like we're dipping into personal distress, we may want to think about how much news we're ingesting and maybe turn that down or off a bit, and maybe get back to what are we doing today? Could I be kind to the person in front of me? Could I be caring to those around me? And practice that way, which will serve us a lot more today and in the future when we have that kind of heart.